Welcome to Chapter 15 of Wilson Rawls' book, Summer of the Monkeys. We were sitting at the table eating when Papa looked at me and said, "If you find the monkeys, are you going to try to catch them?" "No," I said. "I just want to see if they're all right. When I'm going to the store, I have to talk to Grandpa as soon as I finish looking for monkeys. I hope he's got something figured out." As soon as I'd finished eating, I walked in the yard and called Rowdy. "Come on, boy, let's go," I said. The storm had raised Cain in the thick timber of the river bottoms. Trees had been blown down. The game trail we were following was littered with broken limbs and leaves. Puddles of water were still standing in it. Several times Rowdy and I had to work our way around a big tree that had blown down across the trail. "Boy, Rowdy," I said, "I don't think a ghost could have lived through that storm. Do you? I bet those monkeys were drowned or got blown away." About every 50 yards I would stop and listen, and then I'd call in a loud voice, "Jimbo! Where are you, Jimbo? Come on, Jimbo!" I'd stand still and listen to the echo of my voice as it died away in the cold distance. There was no answer from the monkeys, just that cold, damp silence all around us. The first 2 or 3 times I called, I got no answer. It didn't leave me too discouraged. Then a numb, cold feeling of doubt started to creep in. Rowdy didn't help the situation at all. He was slipping along as if they were porcupines he was walking on. At every bend in the trail, he would stop and peek around the corner before going on. His ears were sticking up, and he was watching both sides of the trail like something was going to jump out and get us. Every little way, Rowdy would stop and look up into the trees. He just knew that any minute a monkey would come flying out of there and land on his back and start chewing on him. "Oh, Rowdy," I said, "I wish you'd stopped acting that way. You're making me nervous. I don't think you have anything to worry about, and there's going to be no monkeys jumping on you. After a storm like that, I doubt if there's one left alive." All the way through the river bottoms to the bank of the river, I called and listened, called and listened. I didn't hear a thing, not a sound. A cold silence had fallen over the river bottoms. On reaching the river, Rowdy and I stopped to watch a mother duck with about a dozen little babies working around an old drift close to the bank. I could hear her talking to her little ones. She was teaching them how to find good food around the rift. One of the little ducks decided to do some exploring on his own. He didn't get 10 feet from his mother when she let out a peculiar quack that must have scared the little one half to death. With a baby quack, he scooted back fast like he was walking on top of the water. On reaching his mother, he shook his little tail as if it was on fire, and he was trying to cool it off. I watched another little duck climb onto the mother's back. He sat down on the river and started scratching his neck with his tiny foot. Across the river, on a sandbar, a big blue crane let out a big old squawk. With its wings flapping and its long legs dangling in the water, he took off down the river. Out in the middle of the river, a big old catfish rolled and boiled up the water into white foam. Instantly, the mother duck quacked her alarm and herded her babies back to the shallows. She knew all too well that a baby duck could make a big good meal for a big old catfish. Rowdy and I walked up the river bank about 300 yards and then cut back through the bottoms. It was the same thing all over again. I called and got no answer. By the time we reached the rail fence around our fields, my doubts were getting stronger and stronger. "Rowdy," I said, "it sure looks like our luck has run out. I don't think there's a monkey left around here. I guess something happened to them in that big storm." The next thing that Rowdy and I tried wasn't easy. We followed the game trail until we were about halfway between our fields and the river bottom. Then we left the trail and took off right through the middle of the bottoms. It was tough going through the thick underbrush. The ground was wet, muddy, and slick. Once my bare feet flew out from under me and I sat down so hard I grunted. Every now and then the underbrush was so thick we couldn't make our way through it. I'd get down on my hands and knees and crawl until I couldn't stand up again. Every time I shook a bush, water showered down on me. Along the way, I called and listened for the monkeys. The only thing I heard was my deep breathing and the thumping of my old heart and the panting of old Rowdy. Several times I tried to get Rowdy to go out on his own and do a little sniffing around, but he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't get 5 feet from me. Once I really got tough with him. I scolded him and even picked up a stick and made believe I was going to whip him. Rowdy knew I was bluffing. He knew I would never hit him with a stick. He just whined a few times and sat down on the mud and looked at me. In every way he could, Rowdy seemed to be saying, "If you want to go monkey hunting, that's all right with me. I'll even go along with you, but I'm not hunting those monkeys off by myself." We worked our way through the bottoms for a good quarter of a mile. I kept calling and calling, but got no answer. Finally, I gave up. Cold, wet, and very discouraged. I sat down on an old sycamore log and buried my face in my arms. Almost in tears, I started talking to myself. All those monkeys are gone, and I'll never see them again. Big Jimbo and all the little ones. I'll never have my pony or my 22, not ever. Rowdy could tell that I was unhappy, and this made him unhappy too. He came close to me, and he tried his best to cheer me up. He tried to push his nose up under my arm so that he could lick my face, and then he started licking my hands. I put my arms around my old hound dog and said, "It's not your fault the monkeys are gone and dead. It's not my fault either. I guess we just weren't supposed to catch them." A feeling lower than low, lower than I had ever felt, I got to my feet and started plodding for home. I hadn't taken 10 steps when I thought I heard something. I stopped. I listened. I didn't hear a thing. I looked at Rowdy. Usually, if anything made a racket, Rowdy would hear it and let us know. His ears would stand up and he'd point his nose in the direction of the sound. In a low voice, I said, "Rowdy, I thought I heard something. Did you hear anything?" If Rowdy had heard anything, he sure wasn't letting me know. He was just sitting there on the old cold ground looking at me and wagging his little muddy tail. With his friendly old eyes, he was trying to tell me, "No, I didn't hear anything. I wasn't listening for anything. Let's get out of these cold, wet river bottoms and go home where it's warm and dry." I decided I'd just imagined hearing something, and once again I started to walk for home. I hadn't taken 3 steps when I heard that same noise again. That time there was no doubt I had heard something. It was low. It was a whimpering cry, and it sounded like a small animal suffering. Rowdy had heard the noise too. His ears were sticking straight up, and he was looking right toward my right. I could see his nose twitching, and he sniffed for scent. "What was that, Rowdy?" I whispered. "It sure didn't sound like a monkey. It sounded more like a little animal that's been hurt. Let's see if we can find it. Maybe we can help it." With Rowdy in the lead, we started working our way toward the sound. It had gone about 200 yards down when I stopped to listen again. For several seconds, I didn't hear a thing. Then I heard a low, pitiful cry. "Rowdy," I said in a whisper, "what is that? It must be suffering. I bet that storm blew down a den and that had some baby raccoons in it or something, and one of 'em's hurt." Again, Rowdy and I started boring our way through the thick underbrush in the direction of the cry. We had worked our way to the bank of the deep washout when I stopped and listened, and I heard the cry again. I could tell it was coming from under the bank in the washout. Catching a hold of a tall cane growing on the riverbank, I bent down and used it like a rope to let myself down to the shore. I could see a lot further in the washout. No brush or trees grew there, just a bunch of grass and cattails and ferns. I stood there for a moment, and when I didn't hear anything, I whooped. I was answered by that low cry. By the sound of it, I could tell I was close to whatever was making it. I walked up the washout about 100 yards and stopped to listen. Then I heard that cry again. I almost jumped out of my britches. It was coming from right behind me. I turned around, and at first I couldn't see anything. And then I saw a small pocket washed out up under the bank. Rushing water had made a hole a long time ago. Mumbling to myself, I said, "Whatever it is that's crying must be under that bank. It's the only place it could be." I eased over to the side of the washout and dropped to my hands and knees and looked under the bank into the pocket. I almost screamed. I was looking straight into Jimbo's face. I just knew he would come boiling out from under the bank and jump right on my face. But he didn't. Jimbo didn't move or make a sound. He just looked at me and batted his eyes as if he were very sleepy. He was just sitting there with his back against the wet, cold, muddy bank. All the little monkeys were there too. They were huddled up against his body as close as they could get, trying to keep warm. He had his long arms wrapped around all of his little friends as if he were protecting them. Right away, I saw that the monkeys were in terrible shape. They were sopping wet, and their small bodies were quivering from the cold. "Holy smokes, Jimbo," I said. "What are you doing in there? The storm's over. You've got to come out of that cold, wet place and start moving around. If you don't, you're not going to make it. Come on, let me help you." Jimbo didn't move. All he did was open his big mouth and utter a low, pitiful cry. I felt sorry for the monkeys. I wanted to help them, but I didn't know what to do, and I was afraid one would jump on me. One little monkey looked as if he were already on his way to monkey heaven. He was off a little to one side and stretched out on the cold ground. At first, I thought he was dead, and then I saw his tiny mouth open as if he were gasping for breath. I couldn't stand it. I just couldn't stand it. I almost cried. Before I realized what I was doing, I reached in and caught a hold of the monkey's hind legs and pulled him out from under the bank. Taking my handkerchief out of my back pocket, I started drying him off. I laid him down on his back and started rubbing him and working his legs. I almost rubbed the fur off that monkey, but I must have been doing a pretty good job because 5 minutes later the little fella started moving. He even squeaked a few times. Still holding the little monkey in my arms, I eased over and started talking to Jimbo. "Come on, Jimbo," I said. "Bring your little friends and let's go down where the sun is shining. They can dry out there and get warm." Jimbo looked at me and then looked at the little monkey I was holding in my arms. I started rubbing the little monkey and talking to it. "It looks like you're going to make it now, little fella," I said. "It's a good thing I found you when I did." Jimbo must have realized that Rowdy and I meant him no harm. He came out from under the cold bank. The little monkeys started crying. They didn't want Jimbo to leave them. I set the little monkey down on the ground, and then I stood up and watched to see what would happen. Rowdy came over and started licking the little monkey with his warm tongue. The little monkey seemed to like it. He closed his eyes and let Rowdy wash him away. For a few seconds, Jimbo stood there watching Rowdy, and then he did something that almost paralyzed me. He shuffled over to me, caught a hold of my overalls, and climbed up into my arms and laid his head on my shoulder. I swallowed. There was a big lump in my throat that crawled all the way up, and I put my arms around his cold, wet body. I started talking to him. "Everything's going to be all right, Jimbo," I said. "You don't have to worry. I'll take care of you. Now let's get your little friends from under the bank and let's take them out to where the sun is shining so they can get warm and dry." I set Jimbo on the ground and went over to the pocket and got down on my knees. I closed my eyes and I gritted my teeth as I reached back under the bank and I got a hold of a monkey. I just knew some needle-sharp teeth were going to sink into my hand, but nothing happened. The monkeys must have been too cold and stiff to care. There was no bite left in them. Jimbo watched every move I made, but he made no effort to jump on me. He seemed to realize that I was trying to help his little friends. 5 times I reached under that bank and pulled out little monkeys. They were in worse shape than I thought. They sat where I put them, right down, all humped up, crying and shivering. Talking to myself, I said, I think that's about all I can carry this time. Gathering all the little monkeys in my arms, I started in a dog trot down the washout to the patch of sunshine I had noticed. Rowdy and Jimbo came with me. About 30 minutes later, I had all of them drying out in the sun. I kept count as I made each trip with an armload of monkeys. I could hardly believe it. There were 28 little monkeys and Jimbo, 29 in all. In no time at all, the warm rays of sun had the little monkeys pretty well dried out. I picked up one little fellow and rubbed his fur with my hand. He was as dry as Grandma's yarn. The little monkeys made no effort to bite either Rowdy or me. I couldn't understand it. In fact, they seemed so happy that we were there. I could pick one up and pet it at any time I wanted to, and it wouldn't bite me. The storm and the terrible night must have had something to do with it. I was pretty sure that if I could get Jimbo to go with me, I'd have no trouble with those little monkeys. They would just follow him, and that's exactly what they wanted. I decided we'd give it a try. Taking Jimbo's big paw in my hand, I said, Come on, Jimbo, let's go to the house. I have a good warm corn crib that's warm and dry. I think you and your little friends will like it. It'll sure beat those cold, wet bottoms. You'll have plenty to eat, too, I can promise you that. Jimbo must have understood me, or he had already made up his mind to come along willingly. He made no trouble at all. We climbed out of the washout and started up the game trail. I was afraid to look back to see if the little monkeys were following. If they didn't follow us, there was nothing I could do about it. Just absolutely nothing. I hadn't gone far when a little monkey came zipping up by us. With his skinny tail high in the air, he took off down the game trail as fast as he could run. The first thing I knew, all of the monkeys were around us. In the underbrush, both sides of the trail, swinging through the trees and hopping along the trail, they were following us. I couldn't help but grinning to myself. Boy, oh boy, I said in a low voice, if my luck will just hold out, I'll have my pony and my gun. I could almost feel them in my hands already. I was within 100 yards of the house when Daisy came out on the porch. At first, she just stood there, leaning on that old crutch of hers. I saw her eyes. She closed her eyes, she shook her head, and then she opened her eyes again. She started yelling. Mama, Mama, come and look. Hurry, Mama, you're not going to believe it. Jay Berry has come home with 1,000 monkeys. I'd never seen 29 monkeys grow into 1,000 so fast in my life. Mama came flying out of the house. She had a tea kettle in one hand. I saw her mouth drop open, and I saw that she was going to say something, but she must have lost her voice because I didn't hear a thing. I really couldn't blame Mama for being so surprised at what she was seeing. It's not every day that a boy comes walking out holding hands with a chimpanzee and 28 little monkeys hopping all around them all over the place. Things like that don't just happen every day. Well, don't just stand there, I yelled. Somebody go and open the corn crib door. Mama and Daisy started running at the same time. Mama still had the tea kettle in her hand. I'd never seen my little sister run so fast. That old crutch of hers didn't even seem to touch the ground at all. I saw Papa come to the door of the blacksmith shop. He must have been sharpening something because he had a file in his hand. For a second or two, he just stood there, looking at me and all the little monkeys. Then he dropped the file and came running toward us in a long lope. Mama and Daisy were standing off to one side of the corn crib when I came walking in. I couldn't help but smile at the look on their faces. I could see that Mama wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were glued on Jimbo. She was still holding the tea kettle in one hand. Jayberry, she said in a frightened voice, that thing's not a monkey. It's a young gorilla. You be careful. Oh, Mama, I said as I reached down to pick up Jimbo in my arms, he's not a gorilla. He's a monkey. And he's tame. He's as tame as old Rowdy over there. Can't you see he's not trying to hurt anything? No, I can't see, Mama said in a loud voice. Have you forgotten the day you and Rowdy came home bitten all over? Oh, it wasn't their fault, Mama, I said. It was our fault. It was all mine and Rowdy's fault. They thought we were going to hurt them, and that's why they bit us. Jayberry, Mama said in a firm voice, I don't care what you say. You put that monkey or whatever it is in the corn crib this minute. Lock that door and keep it locked. Oh, Mama, I said as I started toward her with Jimbo in my arms. I don't see why you don't pet him a little, and then you can see how friendly he is. You won't be scared of him anymore. He's not going to hurt you. I had never seen my mother move backwards so fast, and her face turned as white as a hen egg's. J. Barry Lee, Mama yelled, you better get that thing away from me right now. I do not want it close to me. If you don't, you're going to get the whipping of your life, and I mean it. From the tone in her voice and the look in her eyes, I knew she meant exactly what she said. Oh, Mama, all right. I don't see why you're so scared of Jimbo. He's not going to hurt you. Just then, Daisy came over to me and said, J. Barry, do you think Jimbo would let me pet him? Sure. You want to hold him? Daisy nodded her head and held out her arms. I passed Jimbo over to her. He wrapped his long arms around her neck and whimpered as if his feelings had been hurt that I had passed him off. Turning her head and looking at Mama, Daisy said, Oh, Mama, he's such a friendly little thing. Seeing Daisy with Jimbo in her arms did Mama more good than anything. She lost a lot of her scare, but not quite all of it. She said, Well, it does look like he's going to be friendly. I didn't know monkeys got that big. Papa came over and said, How did you catch them? It couldn't have been very hard. You weren't in the bottoms very long. I can't understand it, Papa, I said. I didn't have any trouble at all. I think they wanted to be caught. They sure acted like they did. I told Papa everything that had happened down in the bottoms from the time Rowdy and I had gone down the game trail until I found the monkeys under the bank. Papa said, I think that storm had more to do with your catching them than anything else. These monkeys are tame. They've lived in cages all their lives. They've never been out in a storm like that before. That probably scared them half to death. It's no wonder they wanted to be caught. It's a good thing that Jimbo knew where that hole was, I said. I don't think they could have made it through the storm if they'd stayed in those trees. They almost didn't make it out anyhow. I turned around to see what the little monkeys were doing. I couldn't see one anywhere. I got scared. I just knew they'd gone back to the bottoms. Where'd they go? Where'd all the little monkeys go? I shouted. Papa laughed and said, Oh, they're all hopped up in the corn crib. I hurried to the door and looked in the corn crib. The little monkeys were sitting all over the place, each one of them holding a big ear of corn, and they were tearing at shucks with their needle-sharp teeth. Daisy brought Jimbo over and set him right down in the middle of the corn crib. Right away, he got an ear of corn and joined his little friends. By this time, Mama had gotten over her scare. She came over to the corn crib and looked at the monkeys. Why, the poor things are just starving to death, she said, all concerned. I'll go and heat a pan of milk for them. I bet they'd like that. All excited, Daisy said, And I'll go get 'em some apples. Right then, I saw a good chance to get back at my little sister. Daisy, I said, trying to act very serious, if you don't stop feeding our apples to those monkeys, we're not going to have any apples left. Daisy smiled and said, Oh, J. Barry, you're just trying to be cute now. Well, that's what you told me, remember? Papa said, I think I'll get a bale of straw and make them a bed to sleep in. After a night out in the storms, I bet they could use some sleep. Just as Papa turned to be on his way, he stopped and he looked at Mama. There's something I'd like to know, he said. What's that? Mama asked. Papa smiled and said, What are you doing with that tea kettle? Mama looked at the tea kettle, and you could see the surprise spread all over her face. From the way she was staring at it, you'd have thought she'd never seen it before in her life. She laughed and said, Oh, for heaven's sakes, what am I doing with this thing? All of us had a good laugh, and Daisy squealed, Oh, look at Rowdy! Rowdy was hopped up in the corn crib and sat right down in the middle of all the monkeys. His old tail was really making a racket as it swished back and forth in the corn husks. Rowdy, I said, I'm going to the store to tell Grandpa about catching the monkeys. If you're going with me, you better come on. For once, Mama didn't say a word to stop me. All she said was, J. Barry, you hurry back, because I don't want you out late. This has been Chapter 15 of Summer of the Monkeys.